Hello and welcome to this episode of the Event Manager podcast that features Juraj Holub on leading a new generation of meeting designers. Juraj is the VP of Brand and Communications and Chief Meeting Designer for Slido, and he is joined by myself and the Deputy Editor of EventMB, Dylan Monorchio, in a conversation that covers the evolution of the bootstrapped startup that was Slido and now recently acquired by Cisco, as Juraj was employee number 8 and the company now has hundreds of employees around the world. We talk about some of the burnout that was involved in the rapid evolution of Slido throughout the last few years. We talk about pivoting to virtual, which for a software tool may sound simple, but this was not the case. So we learned from Juraj about how they learned from others and learned from users on how to really be able to do this effectively and efficiently. We talk about the value of content marketing, something that Juraj has done a lot throughout his career. We talk about the importance of interaction at meetings and the getting participants to do their homework in advance of meeting and how that can really improve meetings. And we talked about being open to feedback and preventing attendees from leaving a meeting without speaking their mind, which should always be a goal. Fascinating conversation. I do recommend that you listen to it in its entirety. If you are here listening, then please do subscribe to the podcast and rate it wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate it. And now over to this episode of the Event Manager podcast. Hello and welcome to the Event Manager podcast. My name is Miguel Neves and I'm here with Deputy Editor of EventMB, Dylan Monorchio. And we are joined today by none other than Juraj Holub, the VP of Brand and Comms and Chief Meeting Designer at Slido. And Slido that was just acquired by Cisco, or the intention to acquire was announced a while back, but it just concluded. So Juraj, welcome to the show. Congratulations to you and the Slido team. It's awesome to have you with us. So congratulations from us.
Thank you so much, Miguel, for your kind words. And thank you so much for the invitation. Really happy to be here.
Awesome. I've known Juraj for a long time, and the memory is always tough to kind of pinpoint exactly. I believe we met in Copenhagen at the Fresh Conference 2012, maybe 13. Don't know exactly, but you were studying in Copenhagen at the time, I believe, right? And then you just became a sort of household name in the meeting industry. Were you already part of Slido at that point, or does that kind of part of the story come a little bit later?
You're absolutely right. We met in Copenhagen at the Fresh Conference organized by Martin van Esten. It was the first time I was in touch with meeting design and experiencing the conference that can be done in a different way than just a streak of one-way presentations. And to your second part of the question, yes, I was studying in Denmark and I was working in parallel for Slido back then. So yes, your memory is solid, strong.
That's actually, yeah, it was pretty clear memory. Actually, I had to just kind of double check, but that was pretty solid. I'm impressed with myself. And how big was Slido as a company back then? It was based in Slovakia, in Bratislava, where you are located now and where you're from. How big of a company are we talking about here?
Yeah, I joined Slido in 2013, and I was employee number 8. So the whole team, the entire development department, the entire support department, the entire design department, the entire marketing department actually fit in one room. But unlike the previous offices that we had with no windows whatsoever, because our guys were so much on a tight budget, that it was really the tiniest room possible that they could have rented. This was already the second stage, a more luxurious stage. So we already enjoyed the luxury of a window and actually a pretty nice overview and a view over the lake. And fun fact is that to these dates, obviously the office expanded because we wouldn't fit in almost 200 people that are on the team right now, but we stayed in the same building and we are enjoying the same view over the lake.
Wow. So it's like the Slido block or something now, right? You have the whole building now. That's
Not
awesome.
really, but the whole floor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. And then we kind of stayed in touch. You got involved with MPI and all sorts of things. And you started really working hard on the content side. You did expert blogging on the Slido blog, and you were contributing to lots of different articles, which I thought was fascinating. And then I remember hanging out with you quite a bit in South by Southwest, 2016. Was that a big kind of break for Slido, or was it one of many events that you were able to be part of?
Well, definitely. South by Southwest is, as you use the term, a household, actually a name in the events industry across the globe. And our early strategy was really to get Slido to some of these largest events, and then create that kind of a snowball effect by having Slido actually used by these major events, major speakers, and at the same time being exposed to decision makers that were sitting in the audience. So for us, back then, 2016, Slido being used for the very first time at the big South by Southwest was really a huge milestone for us that helped us, on our journey of establishing Slido as a standard tool for the audience interaction in meetings. And actually, the path was kind of winding. It took us 3 to 4 years, to be honest, to actually get to the large and to the main South by Southwest. And it was the case with most of these big and high-profile events, because you need to build that confidence and the trust with the organizing team. Back then, it was not a standard thing to be using, a live polling and a Q&A tool. So it was a rather a new technology, and we had to take it step by step. The first year, it was just one stage or even one speaker that was using the tool. The second year, it could have been, one room that used it throughout the day. And, gradually we built the trust with the team. They understood the potential of the team and trusted us that we can actually deliver. And that's how we got to events like South by Southwest in 2016.
Yeah, I remember, I think you were on the education stage, and that was one of the things I took away from being there, was that South by Southwest is this massive high profile event, but in practice, it's really more like 30 events that are all kind of together called South by Southwest. And then kind of each venue has its own style, its own vibe, and has its own kind of way of doing things that all make sense. They're all connected. But I remember downloading the app and there being something like 6,000 sessions, and it was just completely overwhelming. And only, I think, by the third day I was there, I realized that each venue had a bit of like a theme to it. Like there was the fintech kind of area, and there was this, and there's like, okay, so if I go by the app, I'm just going to keep changing venue and lose a lot of time in between, like walking around different parts of the city. So it was a big learning for me, but it was really kind of interesting to kind of be there, and see that. I wanted to also cover, I remember, you spent a lot of time in the States, and I think you Slido being bootstrapped, I believe, or kind of, you had low kind of, not a big budget to kind of spend it. And you spent a lot of time on a low budget trying to do as much as you could. And I remember speaking to you, and there was a sort of point, a breaking point where you couldn't really do that anymore. And I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but I'd love you to just talk about that a little bit and just give us some idea of, what happened and how do we not let that happen to people? Because I think it's never a good thing, right?
Yeah. So it was actually 2016 and 2017. I spent a year and a half, almost 2 years in the US. And back then I joined my colleague, Christina. A huge shout out to her. She was really that pioneer that literally just took one suitcase and went overseas, across the pond, and started living in a tiny room above the Dunkin' Donuts in the remote part of the Queens. And after her being there for about 6 to 12 months, actually our CEO Peter Komornik approached me and he was like, "Okay, Juraj, would you like to join Christina in the States? Like, for us, the US is really the market. where we want to focus on. If we want to become a global company, like this is definitely the market number one. And, back then I was, what was I, like 26 or 27. It was incredible opportunity. And like, I didn't hesitate a second. And I said, yes, let's do that, like straight away. And I wouldn't change it for anything else. Honestly, it was a tough time. It was not an easy time. And exactly as you said, Miguel, we were bootstrapped. So we didn't have a multi-million-dollar funding. So we were still in a stage where we weren't counting every single euro. So I joined Christina in that kind of a shared apartment about the Dunkin' Donuts in the remote part of the Queens, sleeping on the sofa or on a yoga mat in the kitchen, and then working long days and sometimes having the meetings with the millionaires on the Wall Street, right? Or multi-billion-dollar companies, and you had to just like keep your face like, yeah, I'm perfectly aware. I'm perfectly used to this, right? Like I can handle this level of meetings, no worries. Yeah. I'm not just a tiny guy from Eastern Europe sleeping on the yoga mat somewhere in Queens. So it was really an interesting time back then, but incredibly rewarding, incredibly thrilling. But as you touched on that, it's obviously like it took its toll as well. And especially if you are starting something new, you don't know what you don't know. And that's an okay phase. But then you move to the second phase when you start realizing how much you actually don't know. So you are in the second stage, you know what you don't know. And I remember I just like, I'll exaggerate a little bit, but I panicked. I saw like, oh, right, I need to do this. I need to do that. I have to catch up on the product side of things. I need to, get better at closing the deals. And it was incredibly overwhelming because back then it was almost like setting up a new office or even a company within a company on the other side of the globe, just the two of us. So one day you had to handle a big client meeting. The second day you had to go and support Slido, technically somewhere in the backstage. Yep. The third thing, you had to organize a conference with some kind of a partners. So with Christina, we really became like a 2-person company, and that was incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I guess I wanted to bring this up because I think it's good learning, but how did your approach change after that? And is that also sort of part of what you do now, and how you like your theory on work and startups?
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually, after about a year and a half in the States, I came to the conclusion when I just like couldn't anymore. Like my my body shut down, luckily with no grave consequences, but I just couldn't. And I was like, okay, I have to do something about it. I have to change something about that. So I actually moved back home because that's where I felt safe. That's where I felt like I have the ground under my feet. And I drastically reduced the scope of the things that I was doing, right? And I returned back to what I fundamentally enjoyed and still enjoying, and that's content creation that you briefly touched on, Miguel, that I do love writing. I do love the process of creation. And that's how I gradually started putting all the pieces actually back in one place, and regaining my mental capacity and my passion for the job that I had loved and still loved, but I was sort of drained in order to do that.
No, that's really interesting. And I imagine a lot of startups, we're recording this in May 2021 with the pandemic and explosive growth or hyper growth. I imagine a lot of people are going through similar things. Maybe they have a bigger budget now, or things are better on the financial side for those working more on virtual. But I imagine that there are a lot of people working very, very fast and breaking things. And unfortunately, that breaking things is sometimes the human side as well.
Mm-hmm. I imagine there's been quite a distinction. I mean, like the hypergrowth, when you have to spend 3 years getting one speaker on South by Southwest, is not the same as the hypergrowth that you experience when in 4 months your company goes from like 2 people to 40 people because everyone needs virtual solutions.
For sure. Yeah, but I don't know if that's something that you've also been a part of, Juraj,
Absolutely. I mean, companies are growing at a breakneck speed these days, right? Like growing whether it's in the funding or the size of the team, it's unprecedented, and it's really, really impressive. So obviously we didn't have that kind of hyper growth, but nonetheless it was crazy. And I like to say that it's like hopping into Ferrari that's got the brakes broken, the steering broken. You just got out of the driving school, and somebody tells you to drive 200 kilometers an hour or 250 kilometers an hour on a country road. That was the feeling that I was sort of like having, right? And you can imagine that yes, for some time it's thrilling, but at a certain point you might just say like, all right, this is too crazy, this is too risky, this is I can't do that. Like, so that was the feeling that I had for quite some time. And again, potentially other people in the startups might have a different metaphor, but the feeling might be familiar. But again, I don't want to speak on anybody's behalf.
I think that's really interesting. But tell me a little bit about your love of content. You managed to kind of return to your love of content and creation. Was that was always your role at Slido, and how did you develop your skills around that? Because I think that's one area that many people in the industry are having to develop also very quickly. Any advice that you can give there?
Yeah, our philosophy at Slido has always been like, if we want to be successful, we need to, or we want to make our clients happy and successful. Like, everything else will follow. And part of that success, or part of ensuring, the success of our clients, was to understand how they use the tool, understand the potential. And I like to say that we, as a maker of the tool, learned from our users how to use it. And we were attending all these conferences where even yourself or other influencers from the events industry actually taught us how to use the tool, how to use Slido. And Peter,
so your clients were teaching you how to use the tool that you created? Absolutely,
100%. Like, I remember there were many sessions, presentations. For example, Porig and Patrick, really, household names, as you like to say in the industry, like, use Slido in such a innovative ways that we would never be able to, understand ourselves. We're not professional facilitators, right? So we started working with professional facilitators, and they taught us how to use Slido. And I was there, I experienced that, and I wanted to capture it. I wanted to create the content around what I've seen, how they used it, so we could share it with other customers and help them make their events and meetings successful. So it was very much aligned, with our philosophy that our success will follow if we make our customers, successful. And I have to give a huge credits to, again, Peter, our CEO, that believed in me, that believed in the role of content, because very often you have a lot of pressure, like, what's the ROI of content? Why isn't it, converting, or it's not converting enough people who come to visit? But for us, it was really about learning, about passing that knowledge forwards, and about the thought leadership, and being more than just a technology.
And I'm sure not just a little bit about SEO.
Yeah,
let's be real.
Yeah, it is a part of that, absolutely. Like, SEO is a part of the game, right? And you want to be searchable, obviously. And especially if the industry is getting more and more competitive, right? Like, you want to have the first page rankings, no doubt about that. But back then the situation was a bit different. Like, the competition wasn't that fierce. People were not even looking for those search terms. Like, nobody was looking for search terms, like a Q&A tool, right? Like, a live polling was a thing back then, but the whole strategy was about creating that content, creating the thought leadership, and educating the market.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you are taking your content from practical use cases that you observed on the field. And I know that led to, a number of theories for which you've kind of become known. So, for example, conversational meetings. For those who don't know, how would you describe what conversational meetings are?
Sure. If we're talking about meetings, and we're talking now about the internal meetings, I think you have to ask yourself a fundamental question before you host one. And that fundamental question is ultimately super simple. And it is, do I need this meeting? Do I need to organize that meeting? And if you can deliver and communicate information asynchronously, you should do that. And especially in the remote setup, right? Like use a Slack, use a WebEx, use whatever, Microsoft Teams or whatever tool that you are using. But if you want to have a conversation with your team, then you might actually consider hosting a meeting, right? So the meetings should be a means to gather ideas, to discuss something, not just for the information sharing, right? So that what lies at the core of this idea, that you need to really engage people in a conversation, and you need to scale that conversation like effectively if you want to get the most out of the meeting. So again, this is the whole idea behind that. Like once you are hosting a meeting, then make sure you get the most out of the time that you spend together. And that goes very much hand in hand with the conversation and with gathering the best ideas, scaling the input from and crowdsourcing the input from people, so you can come to the conclusion, to the best solutions, etc. So that what's lie at its core.
That really reminds me of something Garrett Haikup was saying in one of our previous events about kind of flipping the script on the one-to-many dissemination of information at events, wherein people would ideally do their homework at home and then come to the event for the purpose of collaboration. But when it comes to scaling, how would you recommend that somebody take that kind of concept of appearing at an event in order to participate in something to a larger scale, say 1,000-person event?
If you don't mind, Dylan, I would touch on the first part of your question, or the first part of the content that goes hand in hand with what Garrett said. And shout out to Garrett. He was also one of those people from whom we learned really a ton, and he keeps on inspiring us. And just coming back to that, doing your own homework. This is something that drastically improved our internal meetings within the team. So before we host the meeting, and again, we are talking not about the events, but the internal meetings over here, letting people know what they are supposed to do, how they are supposed to prepare, giving them the time to brainstorm before you actually meet in the meeting has drastically improved the quality of the time that we spend together. If we are supposed to be talking about the content strategy for the Q2, or if we are talking about the retrospective of the past project, or if we are talking about the content calendar, like giving the team the homework to do before we meet, has been a complete game changer. And then you need to capture that ideally before the meeting itself. Once you're in the meeting, you have all that content actually captured, all those ideas, and it can be as simple as collecting that input through the Google Doc or whatever other tool there is. And you spend most of the time actually discussing, prioritizing, sharing more ideas. And then once again, that's a practical example of the conversational meeting, right? Mm-hmm. So the great meeting starts before you actually join the meeting itself.
But in an internal meeting where you're dealing with employees, you can mandate that they do that homework. When you're talking about like a larger scale event that's not relegated to your specific team, you can't mandate that the attendees consume a bunch of content and then feed you stuff prior to the event. So how would that apply in a scenario where you're doing, for example, a conference?
Yeah. So in the context of the of conferences and events, we gave it a slightly different spin. We were advocating for conversational presenting, and conversational presenting is about really delivering a pieces of the content before you let people digest what you discussed. And again, Dylan, that comes to your challenging point of the whole concept, and thanks for that. And I think it's a brilliant thing to do, to challenge the whole thing. Yes, you're absolutely right. Like, people will not come prepared, and they will not come prepared, but you can, as a speaker, deliver a concept, deliver a short presentation of about 10 minutes, And then you create a break and you put people when they're sitting at the round tables in the small groups, and you let them discuss what they just heard, share their experience, etc. And then you can deliver another chunk of the content and repeat actually the process, right? And you can easily scale this with, hundreds or even thousands of people. You can do it, physically in a room when people are sitting at the different tables, or when they are sitting next to each other. You can always put people in pairs. And obviously you can use the technology to crowdsource all what was actually said in the audience and bring it on stage to enforce that learning and display what everybody was talking about during that space that you created for the conversation.
I think that's really interesting. I think it's interesting because, in a sense, when you have a room full of professionals with several years of experience, they have done their homework, and their homework was building their careers. So in this way, you're able to leverage the expertise of your audience as part of the creation of the content.
Absolutely. And again, shout outs to our CEO, Peter. He put it really nicely. He asked me after delivering one presentation, the following question. He asked me, okay, you're right. What did you learn from and about your audience? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, okay, then you failed. You didn't do a good job. Like, you don't know who you spoke with, right? Like, you didn't learn anything new from them. You had 100 people, 100 experts, as you said, Dylan, sitting in the audience, and you didn't tap into their knowledge. And I like to say that some presentations that we delivered, World Education Congress organized by the MPI, we had these 2 sessions about the exactly conversational presenting. We used the same technique, as I said, like a smaller, breakout groups in which they discussed a certain concept. We learned so much actually from those experts, and I just realized personally that there are people who are much bigger experts than myself that I'm supposed to be, preaching from stage. And again, this kind of approach lets you unlock that potential that you have in your room, whether you use a technology or you use an old school piece of paper, right?
Right. Nice, humble realization.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the virtual side of things. I don't know how you lived this pivot to virtual. I gather that it wasn't always a comfortable experience to kind of be able to use the tools online. Tell me a little bit about how the last 15 months have kind of panned out.
It's been crazy, honestly. If I look back to March 2020, we were truly a tool for live all hands meetings and live conferences. And I remember that conversation that we had with the exec team, and we said, okay, we need to move to remote. And, I took this kind of a marketing approach to it. I was like, yeah, sure. We are going to change the slogan. We are going to start pumping some content that will be talking about the remote stuff. And then the realization actually hit me like, damn, like we are not a remote meetings tool, right? So we had to completely, we had to turn 180 degrees more or less. And we had to start building the integrations or speed up the integration building process. We had to simplify the whole usage of Slido in the virtual space. And luckily, Slido is basically compatible with any video conferencing tool that you are using as a standalone tool. And on top of that, we as I said, sped up the process of building the integrations with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, PowerPoint, Google Slides, and obviously now the main priority is the WebEx. But the whole company actually had to, turn 180 degrees, and there was even a dip. Like our revenue dropped drastically. We had to actually lay off about 10% of our team. And I remember things looked pretty bleak, and we were standing in front of this kind of a large dilemma. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to actually get out of this mess? So all hands were put on deck, and we said, all right, there's no other way. but to really focus fully on the virtual experience, on the integrations, on educating our customers that Slido can be used, for giving a voice to their virtual teams. And again, helping them to make the switch, and content and education and being there for our customers, has been absolute priority. So we delivered dozens of webinars in a course of like 5 months, 30, 40 webinars. We started running 3 webinars a week, really, just like to be there for the clients and be there for also for the rest of the industry. Putting a lot of content out there, and again, like on the product side of things, trying to simplify the usage of Slido as simple as possible, and make it as easy as possible. And then things turned, and in late April, late May, we started seeing like unprecedented growth, and we basically wrapped up the year with more or less like a 200% year-over-year growth. But that period, like when the crap hit the fan in March and April, that was a scary period.
You think that you had maybe a competitive advantage as being sort of a simple tool that could plug into what people were already using, i.e. Zoom, as opposed to trying to construct something that was more all-inclusive, like a whole event platform that had a Q&A component?
I think the biggest strategic shift was that we simply had to break the lessening tie with the conferences onto which we were clinging so much. And it was a heartbreaking actually move. For the past couple of years, we were really shifting from conferences to the all-hands meetings in corporations. And within the corporations, we started expanding to the small team use case and the solo presenters. And the coronavirus crisis actually sped up that process. And we had to really make that big strategic decision that, yes, internal meetings is the segment where we want to go. And unfortunately, that means that we might lose the events industry segment. And that was actually a decision that we had to make, or the consequences that we had to, sort of be able to cope with. But that actually sped up the whole transformation process of Slido being used as a conference tool to putting it to team leaders and executives that started using it for their team meetings.
It's interesting because from what I'm hearing, it's not as much of a technology shift as it is of a sort of marketing channel and sales channel and kind of, outreach shift, right? So the tech, because what I know of the tool, it doesn't change that much if you use it virtually or on site, but it's like you were set up basically for on-site usage, and it was hard to make that shift. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, Miguel, you just described it perfectly. The tool itself, if you want to use it as a standalone tool, can be used in the virtual environment as well as in live environment for which it was initially actually built. But the biggest shift was in the way our customers, were thinking of Slido. And we are still, like, in full honesty, this is still a big challenge for us. They can see the usage of Slido for their large all-company meetings, such as all-hands meetings, offsites, town halls, but taking it one step further and realizing the full potential of the tool in a team setup for exactly scaling the conversation that we discussed a little bit earlier. It's still a big thing on the educational side of things that we need to actually tackle and find a solution to. So once again, it comes down to the education of our customers, and that starts with deeply understanding their needs.
Go back to the first step and go back to understanding their needs and listening a lot, right? And I think it's really interesting that you bring that up, because I've seen a lot of companies struggle to a pivot or to shift or to kind of move their business. And if you guys as a technology company had this big struggle, then I think for companies that are not so focused on technology, that must have been even, much deeper in many ways. So it's really interesting that you bring that up. But I wanted to kind of make sure we touch on some of the research that you've been doing, because I know you've been focusing a little bit on the hybrid side. And I guess one of the advantages that you have is that because the tool is so well known for being the kind of on-site side of things, then when we are able to meet again and do the hybrid events, which are starting up a bit all over the world, then you're kind of there. So hopefully that'll kind of help in that sense. But tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing in remote meetings and hybrid meetings as well.
Yeah, sure thing. So one thing is hearing the anecdotes, right? And understanding both, intuitively and emotionally what is happening out there in the market. And we just wanted to, put some numbers on it. Simply put, I wanted to find out how remote meetings have changed and how people are perceiving them. And there are a couple of stats that really, we found surprising. Some of them were on a more positive side of things. Some of them were slightly less positive. But
and just to check, who was this research? Like who's responding to this research? Just so to put the context.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a good clarifying question. So we asked 1,500 US office workers. So this is the sample. Again, this was directed towards the internal meetings, not so much for external conferences. So we asked about 1,500 US workers. And well, it doesn't come as a surprise that 4 in 5 actually home workers said that they attend more meetings now than they would in the office. And I think, the Zoom fatigue has become a whole thing, but you don't have to take only a negative look at this stat. Like the online meetings had to supplement also the social capital building meetings. All those short catch-ups and the short small talks in the kitchen, etc. Like people were really fighting with the isolation and being alone, and really online meetings were the easiest and the easiest and the quickest fix. So again, meetings were not only about alignment, about brainstorming, but had to supplement this kind of lessening and weakening social bonds. But this is on a less positive side of things. In the office, 55% of meetings were unengaging. That's what the respondent said. And interesting enough, online meetings, according to our sample, have been more engaging, and 47% of remote meetings, 47% of remote meetings remain unengaging in the online space, right? So there's a bit of an improvement from 55% of live meetings to 47, but still, roughly said, 50% are still boring, which brings me to the two last stats that I want to mention over here. 42% of attendees actually have left a meeting without saying what was on their mind, right? So 42%, that's a rather striking number. So roughly speaking, half of people don't say or don't express their ideas in a meeting, which is, if you think about it again, how many ideas, how many solutions, how much potential actually remains untapped. And having said that, they also indicated, over half of them indicated that their manager needs to get better at facilitating discussions in meetings, right? So again, it comes along with us as team leaders building the right skill set for crowdsourcing that knowledge and for leading an engaging discussion and a conversation, and being there for the team, and not only speaking but listening.
Well, I think I would suspect. I think it's interesting the conclusion that you derived that that the increase in meetings was in some sense to supplement the social bond within a workplace, because what I initially thought when you cited the statistic is that people probably didn't consider the shoulder taps and the quick, what are you working on? And the, can you answer this question for me that I emailed you about, but I didn't get an immediate response, so I came over to your desk. They didn't think of those things as meetings. And so now that those things have translated into meetings, it's not like they're getting less or more of those engagements. They just now happen in the context of Zoom calls. But I do, like, it doesn't surprise me at all that people are bored at meetings, and that, there's this whole move towards asynchronous work specifically, so that you don't have to do as many as many meetings. And I know that in the past, I have also been challenged kind of with having to go to meetings where there didn't seem to be any kind of set agenda. It wasn't clear whether or not all the people who were there had to be there. It wasn't clear whether or not I had to be there. So it's I think there's definitely, when you relegate your strategy to internal meetings, there are all these factors that you have to consider, because people are not excited to go to them in the same way that they might be excited to go to a conference.
Yeah, in a way, you're kind of saying company culture comes through in all of this. And like, how do you like tweak a tool to help or to reflect company culture or to improve company culture? Is that even possible?
Mm-hmm. Is there some way to rework your sort of strategy about conversational meetings where people are asked simple questions apart from the meeting, and then there's more collaboration within?
And Miguel, I'm so happy that you touched on that point. And it is really true. And we like to say that meetings are the reflection of your company culture. So if your boss is very directive and authoritarian and speaks a lot, right? So potentially the meetings will be more or less the same, but it really requires a deep change if you want to open up and lead a conversation and listen to your employees. And sometimes Slido is a really simple tool, right? Like it lets people to submit the questions, but it can cause a fundamental change in your meetings and in your company culture as well, right? You have to be ready to open up, to hear that feedback that might not be flattering, to engage in a conversation and to listen to your employees. And especially if there is a tension, or you didn't speak with your team ever or in a long time, there might be a lot of frustration or unanswered questions, uncertainty. And if you unplug that thing, it can sort of like completely overwhelm you, and you need to be ready for that. But on the other side, it has this kind of a cleansing effect, right? Like you start building that culture of trust, transparency, and a two-way conversation, which I believe is absolutely fundamental for any healthy workplace.
It sounds like tools, audience response tools, I think as a category, I think to speak in more general terms, can affect a company's culture. And is that something that you are intentional about, or is that just sort of a reflection or something that happens as a consequence of using this type of tool?
Very timely question, Miguel. Again, something that we observed and learned from our clients, and we try to be more intentional about, because as I said, like Slido can transform your meetings if used well, and your meetings can transform your culture. So if you use Slido well, and if you pair it with the right skills and change the way you lead the team, that goes very much hand in hand with how you lead your meetings and lead the team. That can have a substantial effect on your culture, as I said, like create a more transparency, more openness, more trust, and that the byproduct is the happiness of the team, more effective and more productive workforce, a happier workforce, or more satisfied. So yes, exactly as you said, like these simple tools can have a substantial impact on the meetings, and as a result, the meeting culture. And it's for some people, this could be actually a far-fetched thing, and it's a long process that we want to be more and more intentional about. And in the first stage, helping people to use the tool. In the second stage, help them build the skills. Third stage, help them transform their meetings. And if they do all these things well, they will see these kind of effects on their culture, right? So fundamentally, if done right, they can transform their culture as a result.
Fascinating. I think event tech is not just a tool. I mean, it is a tool in the sense that it has to be part of a larger process, but it can really be part of the strategic improvement, right? Or part of making those decisions to be better and to be more open if you want to use the tools in that sense. You're right. Just want to say thank you. We're going to wrap up there, but I wanted to ask one last question that we're asking all our guests, which is to recommend someone that you may think would be a great guest for our Events Manager podcast.
You definitely have to invite Leanne Hughes. She's absolutely a fascinating person and a fantastic facilitator. We have worked together on the trend report, from which I shared a few stats, and she was our guest on the hybrid meetings webinar this morning. And I think she's going to bring immense value to all the listeners.
Great stuff. Thank you for making that connection, and we'll make sure to follow up and get her on the show. So from myself and the whole EventMB team, we'd like to thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us, Juraj. Hope you enjoyed that. We certainly did, and hope you listened to some of the other shows as well.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Miguel, Dylan. It was a pleasure.
Ciao.
All right. Ciao, ciao. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Event Manager podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest news and the best articles on technology and innovation in the event industry, head over to eventmb.com.